everyone, and welcome to another episode of God is Not a Theory with Ken Fish. I'm your host, Grant Pemberton, and on today's episode, we have a special guest who is joining us all the way from Armenia. Actually, Ken, you're joining us all the way from Australia, and I guess if you're in Australia or Armenia, I'm joining you all the way from Nashville. So it's all about perspective, I assume. But this is kind of I think this is our most reach episode we've done thus far here, which is kind of exciting. So you'll remember, listener, viewer, that we did a couple of episodes on Ken's latest missionary journey to Armenia, and we did those a few weeks ago. Well, on today's episode, we have someone from Armenia joining us who was with Ken, nonetheless, on that, and it's Liana Harutyunyan. I think I said it right. And Ken will correct me if I didn't, but she is joining us here today. It's well after midnight there, so we'll try to keep this quick for everyone's sake, but especially for your sake, Liana. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, Ken, why don't you? I know that we've actually been trying to do this for a while, and it's been hard. We haven't been able to do it. So, Ken, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I'm not one to just default to everything is spiritual warfare when I stub my toe, but we have had, as they say, the devil's own time trying to get this particular broadcast done, which is why it's coming so late after the Armenian trip. Grant, you've had some issues. I've been traveling, which is always its own issue to manage. And Liana's had a couple of things that have come up unexpectedly. So I'm really glad that we are able to do this. I hope and pray that all of our internet connections hold, because we were just on the front end of this having some issues today. So I think someone does not want this broadcast yet made, but I'm glad that we're finally doing it. Liana, welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us.
And thank you for this opportunity. And yes, it's late in Armenia, but I'm glad to be with you, and I'm ready to tell the things that can be interesting for others.
Well, we're going to do exactly that.
I know that
Go ahead.
Don't know about my country. It's
Well, actually, that was where I wanted to start. Just so everyone knows, how do I know Liana? She was my translator on our tour earlier this year, and she's fluent in both Armenian and English. You can hear that she has a bit of an accent, but don't let that throw you off. She's very, very good in the English language. And so, Liana, why don't you just give us a little bit of your own story as an Armenian, and bring us around to your impressions of the meetings we held together when I was in Armenia a few months ago. But we'll just start with that to get people familiarized with you. We'll get deeper into your story as we go through the broadcast, but let's just start with that, and I'll be quiet for a few minutes and give you a chance to reply.
okay. So I was born in Armenia. I grew up in Armenia, in an Armenian traditional family. And I grew up in Soviet time. Many people, probably the new generation, we don't know about this Soviet idea. We don't know about the communistic era, but it was kind of, our life was divided into two parts. When we grew up in Soviet time, and then this collapse happened, Soviet Union was gone, and we became an independent country, Republic of Armenia. So, and after that collapse, we had this freedom of religion, although in Soviet time, we could read in our books that Soviet Union has and gives freedom of religion and speech. It was written in our constitution, in our books, but it wasn't even clear what is freedom of religion. we didn't know much about religion, Christianity. We just knew that we are a Christian nation. But growing up in Soviet school, I didn't know much about Jesus. Like in our families, people would talk about Jesus, may God save you, but it wasn't real thing. It was just some traditional old thing that illiterate people would use these words like God or Jesus. So I grew up in Soviet school without any knowledge about any God, any understanding about real Christianity. Although again, we were considered as a Christian nation without understanding what does it mean. I know it's hard for some people now to understand that environment, that context, that like some 40 years ago, 30 years ago, many didn't know about real Christianity like we do today. So I was growing up in Soviet school, and I didn't know anything about the book called Bible. So although I loved to read, I would read a lot, but there wasn't any sentence, anything about any God in our textbooks. But there were so many things about the fact that there is no any God. Like knowledge gives the answer to everything. Knowledge is everything. So centuries ago, people couldn't explain the natural phenomena. They couldn't explain anything, and they could just think that there is some creature, some God, and indoctrination was so strong in our schools. Like I remember myself, it was 10 years in Soviet school that all courses, all subjects were teaching us there is no any God. Science, science, we will get all answers, we will build a new kind of society, new kind of human beings, and we will become a society of justiceness, and people, like we will build communism, and we will come to the point that every human being will be so just, so fair, so kind, that one day we will have everything in our stores and everyone will go and get whatever he wants. We will not have any money. We will be very kind, nice, and good people. So as we build communism. So we were growing up learning all these things, that we have communistic party. Party was our consciousness, our mind. It was everything for us. And this party was going to help us to build this wonderful, kind, and nice society. So I was growing up thinking that, okay, one day we will build that society. But it was really hard to believe in those kind of things. Because we were being kind of in our schools, we were talking about Soviet righteous society, and they were teaching us that in our societies people are like brothers. We are so kind to each other. But in capitalistic countries, people are like wolves to each other. They are like enemies to each other. So, and we were growing up knowing that our country is a nice country. So we are building this nice society. We have equality. We have all these just things in our society. But in reality, it wasn't like that. So it was really hard to grow up listening to all these good, nice things, and in reality, seeing all things that were unjust, like my personal story, my family story. So it was very hard to grow up without any understanding about God. Like I understand it now, when I know about the Bible, I know about the real God. Like all the fears I had, all the hopelessness I could have as a school child, all the injustice was waiting for me. It's really even hard to remember those days. When I look back, all was in control, like there was control in all levels, but we were living in that, and it was kind of normal for us to live in that controlling society. So I grew up as a strong atheist.
So let me just try to capture a couple of key points of what you've said, because these are really powerful statements you're making. You grew up in a country which, now this is going to sound very strange to Western ears, because essentially what you were taught about capitalism, we were taught about communism. That, you know, it wasn't good, it wasn't fair. You said that capitalists that you were told were wolves, but underneath all of that, there was a dialogue, or maybe a monologue, going on about how you were trying to build a society that was just, that was fair, everybody would be good and kind. And so this is what you were promised by communism, and communism failed to deliver. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes.
And in all of that, you had no conversation about God in the schools, coming from the government at all. Everything was about science and knowledge, and how educated can we get you to be? Is that right as well?
Yes.
So it's surprising in hearing you say that, or it will be surprising to our listeners. I've heard you say it, so it's not my first time hearing it, but for a lot of our listeners, this is going to be surprising, because in fact, many of those things are going on in America and in Western nations today. We talk about wanting to have justice and liberty and kindness. We're building a better society. All of our politicians say this. It doesn't matter which party they're from. And yet we in the West are living in a time where you hardly dare mention God in a public school. Our government leaders used to talk about God, say in their policy speeches, but that's no longer the case. And if you are somebody who reads the Bible or takes your faith seriously, at least within our mainstream media, which in your day it would have been Pravda and Izvestia, you would have been mocked as somebody who was uneducated, illiterate, a simpleton. But those who were educated and knew better, they in fact would never stoop to such a foolish idea at all. They would simply go get another degree. And so really the path to salvation, although no one was probably using that term, it was through knowledge. So we could say salvation through knowledge, or salvation maybe through progress, something like that. Is that a fair characterization of what you're describing?
I was growing up in Soviet time. Of course, I, as a child, as someone who loved to study, I was having so many questions about life, the meaning of the life. And actually, my father was a believer without any knowledge about the Bible. I mean, because after Soviet Union, after the October Revolution in 1917, they started teaching people there is no any God, no Bible. All believers, they had to hide their Bibles. No, there wasn't any Bible. But since Armenia has been a Christian nation for centuries, these Christian truths and principles are in our culture. I mean, sometimes when I'm thinking about my parents, they were living with all these commandments. It's not that they read in the Bible, but because of their parents, because of their grandparents. I mean, when I'm thinking about all these generations, from my grandmother's knowledge, they got all these principles and they used, like, my mother didn't know anything about the Bible. She started reading when she was 53 years old in 2000. And she was 53 years old. She was reading and she was telling me, all these things are so nice. We needed to read this book earlier. Like, it's true. I love it's true. But in reality, she grew up in all these principles. But at this point, I realized that upbringing, Christian upbringing, even without Bibles, just because of the traditional things that were Christian things, somehow we kept that Christian lifestyle. I know it's not very clear for you, but again, when I'm thinking about my mother, who started reading the Bible when she was 53 years old, she had all the fruits of the Holy Spirit. I mean, sometimes I was thinking, okay, her mother, she couldn't read any Bible, but her mother taught her something without any Bible. And for me, growing up in school, I couldn't believe in my father's faith, in my father's Christianity, because I know they didn't have any book. They didn't read any book. And I was thinking, okay, they are illiterate, they don't have any degree, but my aunties, they could pray for each other and get healed. My grandmother, who would pray for her children and they would get healing, it was kind of shocking for me back then. But since my trust was in my education, in my school, it was bringing kind of rebellious in me. I was thinking, I was ignoring my father's kind of teachings, preachings. He was telling me, I'm blessing you. And I was telling him, I don't need your blessings, because I was thinking it's something that I don't need it. What is blessing? But this is interesting that even after 70 years of living without any Bible, these people, they kept that core principles of Christianity. But now I have this fear that if we don't teach about this true living Jesus, we are going to lose many things.
So what you're describing is really fascinating as somebody who's living in a Western nation, because the West's tradition, its culture, was formed by Christianity. And Grant and I have talked on this show in the past about some of the imperfections of the expression of Christianity through our culture. And really, if you take the Bible seriously, it speaks of human sin, human fallenness. And so it's not surprising that that the expression of Christianity has been imperfect. But you're describing a world in which, because of government edict, because of government mandate, because of the educational process, the Bible was taken out of the schools, was taken out of the culture. And while there remained, we could say, heart religion, particularly among the older generation, this would have been your mother, your grandmother, your aunt, in that age group, there was still heart religion, but they didn't even really have the ability to articulate their faith, because that the wherewithal to do so had been removed from society. And I'm pointing this out specifically because I want our listeners to see how dangerously close we are to what you lived under during Soviet times. And yet in the West, we would say we are free, we can do what we want. You even said that in your constitution, you had freedom of religion. Allegedly, we do in most of our Western constitutions. And yet today, many Western governments are starting to persecute Christian believers for their beliefs lived out. It's okay to believe what you want as long as you don't actually do anything about it. But right now, there are cases before the courts in Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Germany. There was one that was recently discharged in Canada. There are indications of it in the United States. I'm in Australia, and there have been some things that have come up in connection with COVID, but not only in connection with COVID. They're kind of running alongside of each other. So when in all of these countries, we're starting to see indications of this. Is it as bad here as it was in Armenia? No, not yet. Nobody's hauling anyone off to jail. Although, honestly, with some of what's going on in the European situations, they're trying to put those people in jail. And that would be akin to what used to happen when people in your society were dragged off to prison. So again, it's not identical. Very few things in life are ever really fully identical, but there are a lot of very disturbing parallels between the life that you lived and the life that we are now living within Western nations. And behind all of it is Marxism, because as you said, your country was taken over by the Soviet Union, which was a communist society. And in the West today, many people are saying, that's Marxism, that's Marxism. Look at that sign of communism. And we have a saying here in the West, the frog in the kettle. You drop a frog into a kettle full of water, he'll swim around happily. You turn on the heat underneath, the water gets warmer and warmer. Eventually the water comes to a boil and the frog dies. But the frog doesn't have any sense of anything wrong, or he would have jumped out of the water. So to hear you describing these things, I would say to many of our listeners, it's likely going to be shocking, maybe frightening, alarming. I don't know, we can use words like that, but I don't think people realize how strong the similarities are between what you had and where we are today.
The fact that there wasn't any Bible, it was very it was unjust, then society is giving you everything they want to give. When you don't, like in those days, there wasn't any internet, there wasn't, it was closed society in Soviet time. But now you can go, you find Bibles, you can read. But in those days, it was very unjust for us. It's kind of, for me, it's like shame. You are in your 20s and you are learning about this book called Bible. I mean, then after the collapse of Soviet Union, some missionaries came and they started bringing these books. And knowing that you study in university, in one of the best universities, but you don't even know about this book called Bible, and your country is called Christian country. There was this name, but we didn't know what was that. So, and interestingly enough, when I was studying science, that I went to study in my university biophysics. I was studying biophysics, and I was thinking, it's impossible. There was someone created. I was thinking, how could all these complicated things come out of nothing? But in reality, those were years of revival in Armenia. And people, of course, were praying. And even we, in our universities, like atheists, we were starting asking all these questions. And then I got this New Testament, and I didn't even know that there are two books. I was reading the New Testament. It was interesting to me as a piece of literature, especially the book of James. It was very interesting to me. And I was reading about Jesus, but when I was coming to this place that after crucifixion, when he died, and it was telling that the curtain was torn apart in the temple. And I was thinking, what temple? What is this? And there wasn't anything about the temple in that book. And I was getting nervous knowing that someone knows something I can't find in this book. And I was like thinking, no, it's like after all these hard books, higher math, physics, chemistry, I was thinking, I don't understand this book. It's something, there is something about this book, and especially the miracles feeding the 1,000 people. When I was reading about miracles, I was thinking, no, it's impossible. And then I would, for about 10 years, I was thinking about this book called Bible. So, and people were sharing with me, but it was really hard to believe that there is someone just, because in the society I grew up learning all the time, all these talks about building just society and looking all around all this injusticeness, like you could pay bribe in all areas and you get everything you wanted. And for us as young people, it was very hard to understand, get the ideal. What do we want to become? What are we doing? We see, we hear, but reality is something else. So I really started looking for some ideal, for some purpose in life. And it was really hard because people who were sharing with me, we weren't talking about Jesus. They were telling me about paradise, about hell, about other things, but not about Jesus, about his love, about his sacrificial love. Nothing about Jesus. It was somehow, I don't know, maybe I wasn't lucky. Today, when I'm listening to some preachers in different churches, I always think, I wish someone preached that sermon to me, then I was non-believer. And again, we had lack of literature, there wasn't any books, there weren't Bibles. And because of that, I could read other books. I was searching in other places. Like there were fortune tellers, there were all these people who were promising some things about future scientifically. But eventually, I got some audio sermons about Jesus, about his love, about his eyes, about his character, about his compassion. And the most important thing for me was that the preacher was talking about the Jesus he knew. Like for me, I was thinking, this Jesus is real. This guy knows about the Jesus he's talking. And I wanted to go and listen from him about that Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting to me that this character I was reading about from this Bible was real. And he died for me. And I had this terrible fear of death. I could, at some time at night, I could wake up out of fear that one day I will die and darkness will come. I will not feel anything. I will not sense anything. Other people will go into walk and laugh and rejoice. And I will be under this ground and nothing. So I was suffering. I was suffering for years because of that fear of death and fear of nothingness. And then I heard that sermons about Jesus, his love, about his promises, everything. I accepted him. I put aside everything. I got so many answers to my questions of some 27 years. So I committed myself completely to Jesus. My life was changed. But even after some years, I could see that this Soviet, communistic, all these atheistic things, all these strongholds were still there. it took some, like, even now in our society that we have so many churches, we have very good, nice churches, but sometimes I can talk to some people, they are still thinking and they are still sharing the ideas they got in Soviet schools. It was very strong indoctrination.
Yeah.
Very strong,
Well,
even after 30 years.
You know, there are people in the West, in our societies here, who talk about the indoctrination process that is underway. And Grant and I have both had multiple occasions, individually as well as when we've been ministering together, where we've run into people who literally need to have strongholds in their mind broken. And these are old ways of thinking. This is indoctrination. Sometimes there's demonic presence there, but whatever it is, these are things that keep people back from the knowledge of the gospel. And Paul the Apostle even uses that kind of language when he talks about being held captive in our minds, people having their minds darkened. This sort of language it's in the New Testament. And the thing that I find interesting in your testimony is you said you had this fear of death. The book of Hebrews says that Jesus came to free those who all their lives had lived in fear of death. I think a lot of people in the West have a fear of death, but we've been largely taught to suppress that, to pretend like we don't really have that fear, or it's not a thing, or maybe it's not knowable, it's not fixable. And so because it's not fixable, there's no point in worrying about it. Let's just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Live any old way you want to live. There's nothing beyond this life anyway. And yet there are many people who, when they come up to death, they are very terrified, including even at times some Christians, because their mindset is still steeped in that old way of thinking that you've just described. And so your story is your story. But when we talked in Armenia, I thought there are so many people I know who need to hear this, because you found life, you found freedom by listening to a man who was, what do we want to say, enthusiastic and genuine about his faith.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to us a little more about the process you went through as you moved away from the programming, the brainwashing, the mindsets of growing up as a Soviet youth and coming to faith in Christ. You've given us a pretty good taste already, but I wanted to interject that, but I do want to give you a chance to finish out what you were saying.
When I was applying for my university, I was still atheist, and my father was telling me, I'm praying for you. You will be admitted. Like, it was very hard to get into university because some people could pay bribe and you couldn't apply. Like, they would kind of buy the seats in universities. And it was interesting that I was admitted, and then, of course, thinking that it was my father's prayer, it was very hard for me back then. But only later I understood that prayer works. And my father was, again, without any knowledge, without any Bible, he was, with his simple faith, he was asking the Lord and he was receiving these answers from him. And, my parents, they had this chance to accept Jesus. I became a Christian and they accepted. They are in heavens now. And their life in Soviet time, when I'm thinking about them, they were very kind, nice people, but without all this knowledge about the true God, they lived and they suffered so many injustice things in Soviet time, including the fact that my parents, like in Soviet time, government was giving apartments, but you couldn't possess the apartment. You could live, and then you couldn't even sell. It belonged to the state, to the government. So, and my father, who was very kind, nice, hardworking person, who was believing in these nice ideas about communism one day, he just needed to give some bribe to get an apartment. But he was thinking, no, it's not just. It's how can you give bribe to someone to get this apartment? I will wait. And like these kind and nice people, they were just suffering without knowing the true God, without true prayers. This government was kind of dictating and using everything they wanted to use. I mean, sometimes when they say Marxism, all this stuff that government will do everything for us. But what if government decides that for you, for your daily life, this much is enough? If government says that you can live in one-room apartment, it's good for you. It's equality. Everyone needs to live in one-room apartments. And they say, this is fair. Let everyone live in one-room apartment. If this is human righteousness, I mean, every society that does not have God's righteousness, if they are going farther and farther from his righteousness, his word, his teachings, I don't see any hope in those societies because we are coming from there. Generation of my grandmother, they believed in all these nice things, but after the collapse, they couldn't even receive their retirement money. They couldn't receive. It was just coins for them, but they believed. I mean, this free generation that were kind of cursed, they were forced to reject God. And these three generations were kind of cursed. My grandmother's generation and my parents. And after the collapse, now when we have this chance of believing in true God, coming to our real identity as a nation, to come back to Christian roots, like my country, at this point, I think that we need to come back to our Christian roots because it's a matter of life and death for us today as a nation. We are a small nation.
I think it is for us too. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just have to insert that. I think it is for us as well. It is a matter of life and death. You know, the scripture has multiple sayings about this. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. It's interesting, you know, Christianity comes out of Judaism, and Judaism was a national religion in its origins. But it was always the intention of the Lord to be the God of all the nations, and through the Jews and later through the Christian church, to spread that knowledge of him everywhere. And yet every place that knowledge has once been had and is lost, societies descend into darkness. And what you're describing is exactly that process, what you grew up under, and you're describing what it looked like in multiple ways. You know, the government tells everybody they get a one-room apartment, but what do you do if you have a larger family? Or what if just in your own heart, your soul aspires to something beyond that, and the government is telling you you can't have it because the government says so. So there's a restriction, a loss of freedom that comes in a lot of these types of situations. And sometimes it's more subtle and other times it's quite overt, but always it restricts human freedom.
Yes, definitely. And again, sometimes I don't even want to remember those school years, although we were thinking it was a nice life. But now when I know about all these freedoms, all this truth, it's really hard. We were, as a generation, we were traumatized.
There's undoubtedly a lot of truth there.
I remember in my high school, I could see some wrong things in society, and I was sharing with my teacher. I was telling, but it's not just. And she was telling me, you see many things, you just like this. You see, but it was the reality we were living in. And I don't know what will, like this new society we are building in Armenia, I don't know where are we going now, but still, we are kind of coming to Christianity. We need to come back, and more people are realizing that this is the only thing. We have only God, we have only Jesus who can help us, who can save us in this. I know it's my time. I don't have enough time to tell about the situation that we are in now as a nation, like surrounded with these big Islamic countries, strong countries, and we are only 3 million surrounded with 80 plus some 84 plus 80 plus 7 million Islamic countries who are happy to bring Islam to our country. And actually, I know they are dreaming. And there was this war in 2020, this horrible, I still, as a nation, we are in this healing process. But recently in the news, I read that one of the Christian churches we got from this territory, they have already the project how we are going to turn it into the mosque. And I know they are dreaming about my land to turn it into another Islamic country. That is why physically and numerically we are very small. If we don't come back to our roots, to our true God, my country in all areas, economically, financially, emotionally, ethnically, in all areas, we are going to lose. It's again, and we are not, like, we are only 3 million. It's very small number in Armenia.
Right.
So I think that's a pretty good context into the state of the country, into sort of the everything hanging in a balance, so to speak. And in walks Ken, and the meetings and all of the things that are going on there. I've experienced those sort of things. I know Ken has obviously experienced his meetings. You have too. What happened in these meetings? What was going on this trip from your perspective? Because honestly, like as a friend of Ken's, I can tell that it had great impact on him, just even offline in conversations. And so it's just interesting to hear the context and the frame that these things begin to happen. So could you just sort of share a little bit about that?
Like I said, now we have, like, after this 30 years of freedom, we have many churches. We have nice churches, but the topic we really needed after this war was spiritual warfare. During the war, when we were praying, we were like day and night prayers. I was praying for hours. But when we realized that there is something with spiritual battle, there is something we need to learn. And plus, in our churches, I've met with some pastors who would say we need to learn about deliverance. We need to learn about spiritual warfare. We need something deeper, because in some churches, all these ministries are not kind of acknowledged. And when we had this conference on spiritual warfare, I knew some pastors who previously asked me about people who can teach them about spiritual warfare. And I'm so happy that we had those days, a week, like some days in one city for pastors and leaders of ministry. And we had some days in another region. It's a kind of, some people call that region like a desert, spiritual desert region. And when we were having these days of teaching, I was also really impressed, because we have always knowledge, we have always Bibles now, but we need also the power and the manifestations of the power. And okay, we can go and watch things on YouTube, but it will never substitute the real presence. And like I said to Ken, he was kind of teacher of my own heart, like, because I was receiving all the answers I had before the conference, and every question people were asking, he was answering in a way that you couldn't ask any more questions. It was like satisfying, and I loved the fact that it's interesting that before this conference, I was interpreting for another preacher, our good friend Craig Simonian, missionary pastor. Almost a week ago, I was interpreting for him, and he was talking about Jesus as our rabbi with authority, with shmika, with authority. Like Jesus was teaching with that special authority. And a week later, someone is teaching with the authority. And I was kind of recognizing the teacher, this preacher was describing, that teacher with authority, with new explanations. And it was wonderful that we were having these teachings, and then the practical part. Like in Christianity, I really love to see all these transformations, and I love quick transformations, to see quick results. So, and usually when I look at people, like I can see some problems, I can see deep things. And after all these prayers, I could see smiling faces, I could see like kind of freedom. And it was like for people, all these leaders and pastors also, like standing with Ken on the stage, I could see how people were receiving, like they were open and they were learning. They were happy to receive, to know all these things so they could use, because I have noticed that in our days, when people are coming to churches, like the harvest that is coming to church is more damaged than the harvest 30 years ago. I mean, like people need all these things. They need deliverance, they need inner healing. And like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we did not have all these problems that we are having now. That is why church needs to be equipped with all these tools. And another thing I loved about our conferences, it was interesting that people were bringing their hopeless cases. I mean, I knew some people who would come for prayers like a year ago, 2 years ago, and they were calling to each other and telling that you can bring this person, you can bring another person, and he can teach, he can preach. And the only thing, time wasn't enough for us. We needed more time for like to pray for more people, to see more transformations, more miracles. So I was really impressed. And another thing that when they went from one city to another city, it was interesting that everyone already heard about these days and teachings and everything. And people came and they were waiting. And for a moment, I was imagining Jesus and his days when people were coming and waiting to see him, to get more prayer. Kind of, I could see that when I saw all these people who were waiting for their time to receive their prayer. So, and it was another sense of understanding that we need this power. Without this power, without these demonstrations, we can't reach our new generation. We can't go further. My people are tired of everything. Like they are disappointed in everything, in all areas. And there is this hopelessness now in my country. And they need this real Jesus with real power and with real demonstrations. So we had that, and we have this promise that we will get the continuation of these teachings.
Yeah, just to differentiate, because you drew the comparison, there is a hope of a return. That's of Jesus, and it's also of Ken. There's a hope that Ken will return. Just as we're drawing these parallels. Now, Jesus' teachings, those are cemented in Scripture. Ken has a little more teachings that he'll probably give you there. But no, I think that's such a great, that was what drew me as well to Ken, and I know so many people listening, is it felt like finally we get to see the gospel with skin on, sort of doing all the stuff that we read about. So that's awesome. That's great. What has been the effect afterwards, after he's left?
You know, all these pastors and leaders of different ministries, they were from different regions of Armenia, different parts of Armenia. And when I see them now, the best thing we have now is that we learned much and they are waiting for more, and they are practicing the things they learned. So
that's what we want them to do. We want them to engage with it, practice it, and learn to do it well. It's funny, I didn't know we were going to end up kind of going here with this conversation, but recently I received a message from one of the pastors who was in the meetings when we were there, and he was in Los Angeles, and he wanted to know, could we get together? Well, I was between trips, and so I only had a day or so, and I didn't really have time to meet with him, so I declined that invitation. But I just thought it was interesting that here's a guy who's come all the way around the world. It's 11 time zones from Los Angeles to Armenia, so it really is literally halfway around the world. And here this guy is reaching out, wanting more, and it warmed my heart, really, because it told me that the people of Armenia, the leaders of the church in Armenia, they're wanting to see spiritual reality. And that's actually why this podcast is called God is Not a Theory, because for a lot of people, God is a theory, and as I like to say, an unproven theory at that. But if we step into this life called kingdom living, life in the kingdom of God, we realize God's actually not a theory. He is real. And as you mentioned, this man that you heard preaching all those years ago when you came to faith, he was speaking as though he actually knew Jesus and had engagement with him and heart interaction with him, which in fact he did. And so, there's really two kingdoms. There's the kingdom of darkness and there's the kingdom of light. The kingdom of darkness will always enslave people, reduce options, reduce freedom. The kingdom of light, Jesus said, I've come that they would have life and have it in abundance. The whole purpose of the coming of Jesus is to give us life that is enjoyable, life that is filled with laughter and abundance. There really are two kingdoms and only two. And I think for a lot of people, they don't realize that inadvertently, even living in the West, many times they may have slipped into the kingdom of darkness, and they're living in darkness, and they too need to come across the line into the kingdom of light. And that's really the invitation that I want to make to everyone listening to this podcast today, that if you don't know Jesus, if some part of Liana's story resonates with you, whether it was her fear of death or the despair and hopelessness of living in a society that was totally secularized, that was being driven by a communist ideal. As I mentioned, these things are going on within Western lands today. I mean, if this is your reality, you need to change that reality. You surely do not want to be living under that economy of death, that economy of despair, that economy of darkness. You would much rather live under the ways of Jesus. He came to give us life, and he offers life and gives life. And Liana's testimony is of somebody who was raised under an entire system, we could say an entire economy that did not bring life at all, did not bring freedom at all. And she found Jesus and learned that, in fact, life was possible. And I want to offer that to anyone who hears this podcast as well. So if you don't know Jesus, today would be the day. You don't need to wait until tomorrow or next week. And you just need to pray a simple prayer, asking Jesus to come into your heart. Pray something like this: Jesus, I've heard this testimony today, and I realize I don't have life. I don't have it in abundance. I'm living in darkness. I want to know you the way Liana knows you, the way Ken and Grant talk about you. Lord, would you come into my heart? Would you come into my life and take control of it and make it a new life, so I can have this abundant life that they keep talking about? Please forgive me for the things that I have done wrong. Many of them I don't even know are wrong, but nevertheless, I know I need a reset in my life, and I ask you to give that to me through the power of your blood that you shed when you were killed on my behalf on a cross centuries ago. Let me experience that life now. Now, if you prayed that prayer with me or something similar to it, Jesus is going to take you up on that. He says, the one who comes to him, he will in no wise cast out. He'll never say no. So you should accept him at face value and take him at his word and come into this life of the kingdom of God. Liana, we're about ready to wrap it up here, but do you have any last closing remarks you'd like to make? Anything else you'd like to tell our listeners before we go?
I have noticed after this COVID thing in Armenia and everywhere, there are too many lies, too much deception. And when we read in the Bible that you seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness, like it was like we knew, seek the kingdom, first of all, seek his kingdom and his righteousness. But now I realize that his righteousness is different. Like human beings, like in all these societies, everyone is bringing some kind of righteousness. And today is the day then we indeed need his righteousness in everything, in all areas. Just to ask, like the war happened in my country. As an Armenian, as someone who loves my country, my people, I was suffering, but I was looking for his righteousness in all that things that were happening. And then he showed his righteousness, even in the war. I was kind of satisfied, and I realized that, yes, his ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. And we need to look for his righteousness in all areas of our personal lives and in our societies. It's like only his light, like I was praying for my people. Like my main ministry is intercessory prayer. I was praying for open the eyes of my nation. Let them see the truth, the real truth in all areas. And I realized that without his light, how can they see? He is the light. Only he can bring light. Only he can bring the truth. Only he can show the way. Like people can have different ideas, different truths, but if we don't accept and know about the way, the truth, and the life, which is Jesus, we will be always deceived. And
No, that's so good. That's so good. Thank you so much, and thanks for taking time to visit with us and to talk with us about all of this. This has just been just wonderful. And so I just wanted to thank you for that. I know it's late. Ken, thank you. I know it's early. So Ken, you get some coffee. Don't drink coffee, Liana, where you're at. You'll be up all night. I might have some coffee as well. But I want to thank you both, because you're both inconveniencing yourselves to be able to share with us, and it just means a lot. And I know for our listeners, on behalf of them, we just want to say thank you both for that, and we look forward to more stories, more time together. I definitely want to have you back on the show, Liana, especially after Ken goes back over there. It'd be a fun talk to have again. So thank you both for joining us, and thank you all for listening. We'll look forward to being right back here next week with another amazing, piping, fresh, hot episode of God is Not a Theory with Ken Fish.
We've recently updated the Orbis Ministries app with Ken's free teaching archive. You can click on the link in the description of this podcast to download today.